I'm Rob Warthen with DNAGedcom. Who am I? Just a guy enjoys genealogy and computers for a long time. I've been working with DNAGedcom and genealogy since about 2011. I'm one of the co-founders of DNA Adoption and Mitoy DNA. So I'm a graduate from Virginia Tech, Johns Hopkins. But most importantly, I'm an adoptee and brick wall advocate. I try and help people who are doing that. Ultimately, I'm a computer programmer, and I've been working with IT for a long time. And I've been working with big data since big data was big data. So here's a picture of me with my two sons, most important people in my life, and my mom. So why me? Why did I get involved in DNAGedcom and DNA in general? Well, I've been involved with various people over the years who've not known a lot about their past, who have not known their birth family and stuff like that. Ultimately, I like a challenge. I like to find things that are interesting and fun problems to solve. But ultimately, it comes down to one young woman, I should say, named Gloria. So who's Gloria? This here is Gloria. She is my wife, Sue Warthen's mom. And when I say mom, that is her mom. Many of you may know her as the fact that she's adopted, along with her brother, Neil, right here in the gray right beside her. And she didn't know anything about her birth family. Why don't I try and figure out what's going on here and learn something about this? So I ended up started playing and finding out more about this thing called DNA. And it sounded interesting. So I was like, I got a great idea. What should I do with my girlfriend at the time? I'm going to give her a Christmas gift of a DNA test. So I did. She looked at it, kind of looked puzzledly. What is this? And I told her, I explained it to her. This is a DNA kit. And I could tell she was expecting diamonds or a ring or earrings or something. So I was like, oh, and by the way, wherever we find the DNA tells you you're from, we'll go there for a trip. Save myself there. I was asked actually by Gloria, Sue's mom, and that's her adopted mom. But whenever I say mom, that's her. She goes to me and said, well, you're a computer guy. Can you figure out who's Sue's birth mother? And I'm like, what does a computer guy have to do with this? There's nothing with computers. I mean, that's all research and stuff like that. So again, I found the DNA and I finally figured out things like common ancestors. So one of the first people we did find was a man named Matt Kelly. We sent him a request and say basically, hey, by the way, I'm adopted. I'm trying to find information about people. Do you know anybody in the Maryland area? He sends his message back and we're like, we're not in Toto anymore. We're not in Kansas anymore, Toto. Evidently, he's from Ireland. That makes Sue happy because guess what? She decides she's from Ireland. You know, when I gave her that gift, I thought, well, Pennsylvania, New York, California, we'll go somewhere. Nope, she's from Ireland. So this is actually interesting because this is the first time Sue actually got a chance to meet a biological, someone who shared DNA. Now, it was only 10, almost 11 centimorgans. So, but for her, that was the world. So again, we're working with DNA and the fun thing. So we're all genealogists. We love genealogy. We love building trees. So DNA, working with DNA is genealogy on steroids. You have trees and trees and trees and you have trees and trees and trees. And I was like, you have trees and oh my God. And you're trying to figure out, okay, how do these trees fit together? That's ultimately what you're trying to do. Here we are. Let's say we have a match. That's a little blue person. They have to have parents, of course. They have a mom and a dad, and they have a mom and a dad. And all of them have mom and dads. Okay. And all of them have mom and dads. And all of them have mom and dads. Okay. So what do we do with all this data? It's like we have a match. And let's say they're a fourth cousin match, because that's what we're showing here, right? What do we do with all this information? How do we figure this out? So what you have to do is you start with one person. You start splitting it up and work with one side of the family. And you start with one of those great-great-grandparents. And you build back down. So again, you're building back, and then you have to build down. So you're building down, and that parent has a spouse or a birthing partner, and they have a child, and then another partner, and they have a child, and another partner, and they have a child, and yet another partner, and they have a child. Of course, it could be male or female, could change. So hopefully the idea is that person in yellow down at the bottom, hopefully they are an actual match, and you're building off from there. So here you have a yellow view and you can see it all comes back together. And this is what you're trying to do. You're trying to triangulate, do pedigree triangulation, where you're trying to find two matches that match up with its common ancestors. The problem is you're working with all of these ancestors up here. Here's sort of a different way of looking at it. I'm going to kind of skip through these links. You have a match number 2, and you have a match number 3. Number 2 here and number 3 here. And you have a big match in the middle. Your goal is, how do these two work together? So you have to basically build them out and figure out how they come together. And this is a overview and summary to get from DNA Adoption and Kitty Cooper worked together to build this out. And I thought it shows things really well together. And there you go. You end up finding where your you there ends up being unidentified person. So somebody's looking for their birth family. How do you solve some of these problems? Ultimately, DNAGedcom Client. So the client is actually a computer program that runs on your computer. It's completely private and personal. And the information is pulled from the DNA companies to you. You are the owners. Your data is your data. So there's no sharing. And we have some help files, which I actually have to update. That actually should be doc.dnagedcom.com. But what can you do with it? You can gather information. So you have various DNA companies from various companies like Ancestry, 23andMe, Family Tree DNA, MyHeritage. GEDmatch is actually out of beta. And what can you do with it? You can create CSV files, because everybody loves spreadsheets, right? Yay, spreadsheets. So not everybody loves spreadsheets, but honestly, working with spreadsheets is ultimately your best way of learning and being able to pull things together. But not everybody wants to work with spreadsheets, so that's okay. So here's an example from Family Tree DNA, a page where you can actually enter your information. You enter your kit number, you enter your password, and you log in. You'll then get a message saying you are logged into Family Tree DNA. For Family Tree DNA, there's only a single profile, but we actually show the person's name here. That's actually me. You can then choose which set of data that you want to gather. You can gather chromosome information or segment information. I have to figure out which word is better to use anymore, because it seems to change, chromosome or segment. You can gather in common with or shared matches. Again, is it ICW? Is it shared matches? Or is it still the family FIA like 23andMe, but shared matches? And you can gather your matches family trees. So it's pretty powerful. In one shot, you click on a button called Gather DNA Data. You click on that, and it goes out to the website as if you're clicking all those buttons. Now, sometimes it takes a while to run, because imagine you're clicking all of those buttons. In some sites like MyHeritage, it takes a while because there are a lot of clicks. There's a lot of background clicks that are happening, a lot of background things that are happening. And so they put in things called basically stop signs, basically, that say, whoa, you're going too fast. And we recognize that, and we actually purposely slowed things down. So we try and respect the website's system. So we don't just flood them with a whole bunch of information. So the best part is you click on this, you go away. You actually can start a Family Tree DNA, you can start a 23andMe, all at the same time. That's your gather. You can actually choose ranges and things like that. And then you can actually run the report and actually create those CSV files. But we also have things called Autosomal. We also have reports and stuff like Autosomal. So we have a tool that we work with Dana Leeds. We had John Collins work with Dana Leeds to create the Collins Leeds Method. Now, this is based on a concept that Dana came up with, but John added a whole bunch of data science-y things that figures out different ways of actually merging and pulling things together. So it's not a pure method of the leads. We actually do some background things to make things group in a little bit better way. I say that we show common ancestors. That's new. That's actually been out there for about a year. And we also show common surnames. What is new, it's coming soon, is our Generate Cluster GEDcom. We actually had it out there at one point and had some problems with it, so we pulled it back. It will actually generate the GEDcom for you from that cluster. So again, you're looking at a cluster. They have some common ancestors, and you take those common ancestors, you build up from that common ancestor, and you build down to those matches. So you have a family tree to start with. I'm a firm believer in, again, putting things in your hands. So we give you a GEDcom that you can put wherever you want to, upload to whatever site or work with whatever you want to. Just as important, we have a tool called Chromosome Matrix App. This is actually very powerful, and I'll show you examples of these here in a minute. What it does is it allows you to see your segments and your matches at one time. And you can actually see which ones of your matches, again, match each other. So it shows you how your matches match each other. It is unique in the industry. Still haven't seen anyone else doing it. And it's based on the work by Don Warthen and actually a spreadsheet created by Jay from DNA Adoption, a website that Kitty Cooper put together. So it kind of combines all of them together and allows you to do some more things. Ultimately shows you a match that may be part of another cluster, even when that match doesn't show in the larger shared matches cluster. These are pretty powerful, and I'll show you some examples here in a minute. So here is DNAGedcom's Collins Leeds method, and it shows you clusters. So you see clusters here, see the cluster here. And what's interesting is you kind of see some basic superclusters, because you can see like here 4 and 5 are actually part of a larger cluster, even though they weren't enough part of it to make it a real true supercluster. You can see the names on the sides. And one of the features that we actually have in DNAGedcom is we can anonymize the names. So these are all anonymized names. They're all fake, but it's a real person's DNA. And you can actually go then to the tree. And if you look here on the left, you can actually click on the tree, and you actually go to that person's tree, whether it's on Family Tree, DNA, MyHeritage, wherever it is, you can actually go to that person's tree. As well as you'll see, people call them guacamoles. They're actually a little leaf. And what it does is it says that those two people have a common ancestor. So again, that's a pretty powerful feature that allows you to quickly see who the common ancestors are. So again, here are some shared ancestors. You can see a lot of the green leaves, and you can also see a better supercluster. If you look over here, it kind of sticks out here, and you kind of see a little bit more of a gray dash on this right side, because that's part of a supercluster. So 1 and 2. You can see the number 1 and you can see the number 2. They make up a part of a supercluster. They're not strong enough to be clustered together, but they are definitely related. So this might be like the supercluster may be your grandparents. The smaller subclusters may be your grandparents' mom and your grandparents' dad, one of your grandparents' mom or grandparents' dad. So these actually give you the ability to kind of say, okay, well, this is probably my father's side, because they all seem to be somewhat related. So here's an example of the actual ancestors in the cluster. Will actually tell you who those ancestors are, and it tells you which clusters they belong to. So these are ancestors down here. Again, the surnames are made up. So Gwen Zackerson was born in Maryland, and they are actually part of cluster 1 and 13. So you can actually see which clusters they ultimately belong to. So that makes things very powerful. Again, you can actually see, okay, 1 and 13 may be somewhat related because they come together, or they may not be. It may be because of endogamy or some other purposes. Here we are, we're looking at Collins Leeds method, right? The Leeds method. Did you know the Leeds method can actually show you a lot of the chromosomes? So what we do with sites like Family Tree DNA, MyHeritage, 23andMe, GEDmatch, we can actually take those matches, and we will actually show it to you on a chromosome browser. So you can see all of those people that make up that cluster, where they show up. So down here, this isn't a particularly good example, but down in segment on chromosome 3, you can see there's 4 people. That gives you kind of a hint. Maybe that segment might be from this common ancestor, or there might be something common about them. Similarly, this cluster here, you can see on chromosome 1, can have a lot of the same things. Here you're working with clusters, but you can also go back to the chromosomes. And again, I find that very powerful, because if you find some very strong cluster segments, some segments that actually are clustered together and actually have a lot of the common matches, have that segment, that gives you a lot of additional power. Similarly, we have the DNAGedcom chromosome matrix. And here, what you do, this is an example from chromosome 19. And you can actually see the segment start and end and how big the segment is. And what's interesting is you can actually see that they overlap, how much they overlap. So these guys end up being part of group 1, and you see that they overlap. Well, that's kind of interesting. You see that they overlap. This one overlaps with these folks down here, but they don't seem to match each other. And there's a pretty large overlap there. So that's an area I would think if one's on one side, possibly one's on the other, because again, you look at that kind of information. Those again are things, if you're finding areas that nobody matches you and they're overlapping, that's again a hint that maybe somebody's on one side, your mom's side, and the other person, the other groups who are matching each other may be on your father's side. So what are some of the new things that we're looking at? So one of the things we're looking at is what we call the kits under Autosomal. Some of your Mac folks may have seen this for a while and wondered what that was. Windows folks are actually a step behind. I know that's all the Mac folks think that they're the stepchild, but actually the Mac version is ahead of the Windows version at the moment. But what if you want to see all of those matches in one location? We introduced a concept called the DNAGedcom Kit. So that a kit is just your various company kits, and you can actually see how many matches are in that. And more importantly, we can actually see how many different surnames we know and how many ancestors and trees ultimately we have in the system. So that's how much information we've actually gathered. So if you click on one of those DNA kits, you can actually drill down into the matches for that DNA. And what's interesting is you can then filter based on this information. So you can actually enter like how many people have Guarany. Just because I know how the translation worked, this is my own personal one. I'm actually a Guarany. Guarany's Warten. So if you enter Guarany here in the name, it will actually go off and gather that information. It show you only your matches with the name Guarany. Well, that might not be as interesting, but you can also go down what shared segments, numbers of segments. You can actually search by actual relationships, or you can just filter on all the information at the top here. So again, this gives you a way to work with your data locally without having to go out and relook at the data. And it also allows you to gather your matches from all these systems and look at them in a consistent way. But that's not it. We also added the ability, you can use these check marks and you can select certain numbers. And when you do that, you are able to then get a chromosome browser of all of those matches that you've selected. So again, you get that ability to see all of your matches and see their chromosomes. So Denise is my sister, Ron is my uncle, and Charles is my other uncle on my other side. So you can actually look at all of your matches. And I just gave you some examples that probably aren't as interesting because I know how they related to me. This is very interesting for other purposes. You can actually look at your chromosomes and you can work with as many matches as you wish. You can probably go 50, 100. I've done about 50 before. At some point, obviously, that gets a little too large, but this is actually really neat capability so that you can actually look at more than just whatever the DNA companies allow you to look at. And some of the DNA companies don't even give you a very good chromosome browser. So that's one option. If you look here, you also will see the contact, where you can actually click on the contact and look at, and it'll go off to the DNA companies and allow you to contact that person. We also have a calculated relationship, which will kick you off to DNA Painter's Wado, fill in all the information and show you directly how that looks directly on the system. And we also are adding the ability to enter notes so that you can actually enter a note and hopefully it will go out to the site and update the note there at the site. So it'll keep those two in sync. This is features that, again, are coming that we're working on. Hopefully will be out next quarter, I would say. And again, I showed you the chromosome, and then obviously family tree. If they have a family tree, it'll go off to their that tree. And again, so we are working on this concept called DNAGedcom People. These are looking at the actual your matches ancestors. So the problem is, how do you work through all these people? Well, we used to have the concept called GWorks, which is very powerful, and I'll mention that at the end because it's currently available. But we want to be able to give you other capabilities and other ways of working with your data. With DNAGedcom People, you again helps you find your common ancestors. So you can find common ancestors, surnames. You can look for certain places of birth and other common information. And ultimately, you'll be able to generate out a GEDCOM file from any common ancestor. So if you find a person in there, you will then be able to click on them and find information. So here's an example. Again, we have full search capability. So I can enter all Warthens between 1700 and 1850, and it will go out and find all the Warthens out there, anyone with a surname that has the word Warthen in it, born between 1700 and 1850, and shows you the birthplace and actually how many trees have that. So in this instance, tree count. So what does tree count mean for a ancestor? That just means that there are two matches that have that ancestor. And so you can actually drill down into that. But just as importantly, we're going to give you the ability to generate out a GEDCOM that you can actually see that person's. So all of your matches that have that person as an ancestor, it will build their tree back and build the trees forward to those ancestors. So you'll have all that information best that you can. This gives you some place to work from instead of having to build all this data all by yourself. So again, it shows your common ancestors, surnames, locations, allows you to select across kits is coming soon, and that's probably early next year, to be honest. We also added the ability to do a wiki tree, to create from a wiki tree, to be able to output to a GEDCOM. And again, being able to create GEDCOMs from common ancestors. And so it works for family tree DNA, ancestry, MyHeritage with Max to some extent. GEDmatch and 23andMe are things that we're working towards. 23andMe doesn't have true family trees. However, they kind of have some, and they also give you some links to those. GEDmatch, we're actually a little bit closer with because we are able to work with WikiTree. So if somebody enters a WikiTree ID, we are able to pull that family tree information out. And finally, we have data. That section is where we want to show lists of kits and show when the kits were gathered and show ranges that were gathered. That's an area that probably is still in concept phase that we're still working on. So that ultimately is what DNAGedcom is. But what happens if you want to share? So we had this concept called genetic family, and I would invite everybody to how many people actually remember and know about that, and how many people are interested in the concept. So what the concept is that everyone would upload their information to genetic family. So you would upload your matches, and then you would then be able to share information. So for example, family tree DNA doesn't give you how much your matches match each other. If everybody would upload to GEDmatch or genetic family, we'd then be able to see how they match each other. There's also other concepts with a WikiTree where we're looking at being able to collaborate and stuff like that. But I am interested in people later during the question and answer, how interesting that is to people still, because ultimately the problem becomes privacy. How do we handle privacy and stuff? So I just wanted to put that out there as a question for people to kind of see. And Bonnie, how do you anonymize the names in a cluster? If you are a gold member, you can go to the settings page and there's an anonymize button there. I think it's turned on for gold members. At one point, we only turned it on for a level that we called angels. When I say ranges, that means centimorgan ranges. So you can say things like, you can actually set how large or small those various ranges are. That's or number of segments of different things like that. So that's genetic family. And I'm not going to actually go over a whole lot of details on that. But I am interested in people's thoughts in terms of, is there interest in a more of a shared system, and how do we work around privacy and stuff like that? So what do you do with these spreadsheets besides the examples that I showed you? And again, DNAGedcom is not just spreadsheets anymore. We have a lot of tools, but we can't write all the tools. And so we are excited that there's so many other people out there that use our data in a spreadsheet format to do other things. So here are just a few of the tools that are out there that use data from DNAGedcom. Includes these sites here. And I'm actually going to talk about all of them except for WikiTree here shortly. So this is Genome Mate Pro, which actually should have updated that to GDAT. So GDAT is a tool that allows you to work with a lot of your data in a local database, again, just like DNAGedcom. A lot of our goals is to implement some of these things in DNAGedcom, but right now there's the tool called GDAT that will allow you to do that information. And it allows you to look at your matches and pull your trees together and stuff like that. Very powerful tool. Next, there's RootsFinder. And so what RootsFinder does is it allows you to visualize a lot of your data. And you can actually see how that data comes together and how they match each other. So it shows you that common information. Next, we have Charting Companion. So we actually worked out a way to be able to see data and display it, basically take your data, and Charting Companion has a tool called DNA Simulation that we were able to feed data into. So here's what Charting Companion with their descendant chart DNA matrix allows you to kind of see how all that data kind of fits together. Again, a very powerful tool using data from DNAGedcom. Next, we have American AncesTrees. So again, it has various tools. I definitely recommend you check them out. And they allow you to take shared matches and see how they match each other in sort of a circle wheel. So it allows you to kind of see how things fit together. Next, we have DNA Painter. DNA Painter allows you to upload some DNAGedcom data, and it will actually then allow you to then do some auto painter tools. And so basically gives you some basis for things. And these clusters will then be those clusters that get created. MitoY-DNA has nothing to do with DNAGedcom, except for the fact that MitoY-DNA is also a company that a nonprofit organization that I helped co-found. It works with your mitochondrial DNA and your Y-DNA, and basically gives you tools to work with that information. It also works now with your big Y. We have a YSTR Plus tool that allows you to look at all of your big Y data in one location, all the STR information. And it matches mitochondrial and Y-DNA. So if you have data from not family tree DNA and you miss not being able to match it, here's a place to upload it. And then if you've uploaded, even if you are at family tree DNA, uploading to here, because you may match to people who have passed away long ago, and we just have their old data and stuff like that. So from places like Sorensen and Ancestry, when they used to have their Y-DNA and mitochondrial DNAs. Again, I mentioned a tool called GWorks, and GWorks is near and dear to my heart. It's actually the tool that I was working with to help help me find my wife's common ancestors and ultimately her birth family. What it does is allows you to find common surnames, because if you see common surnames in a lot of your kits, maybe those are surnames you need to look into. It actually allows you to compare trees. And there's also a way to do what the old tool that people used to call mirror trees. You can still do that same sort of concept using this. And you don't have to wait for the recalculations to happen. You can also find how your matches are working with each other, and you can quickly look through your matches ancestors. So like, let's say, I remember there was a Warten. I remember there was a Funk. I remember there was a Dunn. It's like, so I'm working on this tree, this matches tree, and all of a sudden I see a Dunn. It's like, do I know a Dunn? Is Dunn something that's interesting to me? You can then go over and look it up. So what it is, it allows you to compare all of your matches trees right now. What it does is, if you look at that first line, you'll see William Elder, born 1707 and passed away in 1775. Most likely we just had the year for that person. So a lot of times when you see 01, it's just 0101. But what's interesting is there's 24 quote unquote files. This is based on GEDCOM's uploads, but now it was expanded to also include, to automatically pull together family tree DNA, MyHeritage, and I don't know that we work with GEDmatch, but in theory we could. So we know that we have 24 files out there, or matches, that have that person in their tree. Well, this is interesting. I'd be very interested in figuring out who this William Elder is. In my case, he's my great grandfather. Again, I'm working with my trees. It's actually very exciting because my top person there shows up immediately as the top person, and I know very much who it is. All these people through here are folks that I know very well because I know my family tree. But if you didn't, it's kind of exciting to see that it happens. Well, let's say that you are interested, you have a particular match you're really interested in, and you want to know, does any of my other matches have that person in there, or which other matches have common ancestors for that person? What you can do is you can enter that match's name. So let's say I have James Monroe as one of my matches. I would actually enter James Monroe in here. And what it'll do is only show you trees, ancestors that have James Monroe as one of the matches in that list. So it's confusing. And I know that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But basically what you're doing is your match name is the file name is your match's name. So when you enter in here one of your match's names, it will only include in that bottom section there, those ancestors that have that tree in that list. So it's a quick way of doing what's called a mirror tree, where you look at the people who match that match, who have ancestors from that tree that are also in there. So if you can then find other matches that have ancestors also of the same match that person is. But these are basically just names. Basically what you have here is you have a compare level. Exact means they have same surname, same given name, birth date, and death date within a year. And then we have other various levels that they can actually match. Then you have your surname, your given name, the sex, birth date, death date, and how many files that they actually match. Yes, he's my 5th great grandfather, William Elder. And you can see up through there, everybody, how he matches in. Now, what's interesting about William Elder is he probably is the ancestor of pretty much everybody from my small town. So we talk about going back to the Pilgrims timeframe. A lot of people who've been in the U.S. for a long time go back to Pilgrims. Well, pretty much everyone from Emmitsburg, Maryland, go back to William Elder at some point or another, if you've been in that area. So again, how do I use mirror trees? You create the perspective tree, or you use one of your matches that has a tree. You upload that tree to GWorks if you haven't already. You run the GEDCOM and you run compare all trees. So I don't use it just for my matches trees. I start building trees that I'm trying that are interesting trees to me. And then I keep uploading that GEDCOM to GWorks and see how it matches in. And as I build that tree back, do I tie in another match or another match or another match? So this is a way for me to see, as I'm building trees back, do I all of a sudden, have I found some additional match that matches in with this tree? That's easy, right? Easy, fun, no problems whatsoever. Didn't I start this whole thing with Sue, right? Ultimately, what about Sue? What happened with her? So what did we know when this whole thing started? Well, we knew Sue's adopted name said baby girl Greg. We knew we may want to find a female Greg because back in the day, they actually used baby girl and the actual mother's last name. We did know that the birth mother's father had died from some particular cancer. We knew that from non-identifying information. Again, if you're adopted or you have that kind of capability to get that information, go back every few years and ask for your non-identifying information as if that's the first time you've asked, because sometimes they will give you different pieces of information, non-identifying information. So it's always good to go back if you need to and go back. And then we knew that he had passed away before my wife was born. So we knew at least where the death date should be behind there. Looking at the DNA, we had some interesting names: Clemens, Palmer, Moore, Marriott, Swan. Didn't really give us a whole lot. This is still in the early days where if you had a 5th cousin, yay, but we really didn't have a whole lot. Again, this is back in 2011, 2012. We did, from looking at a lot of her matches' ancestors as they went back, it looked like they went back through they came from Scotland, Ireland, Delaware. We thought that there was a lot of Irish ties, probably from the father. We weren't really sure, but there's a lot of hints. And so there's things that you put in the back of your mind and you think about as you are working through trees. We did know, again, that we called a bunch of women who were Gregs, and we found a woman called C. Greg. So a lot of times you're like, okay, I don't have a lot of information. How about you go out and make your own information? So we found this woman named C. Greg, whose sister was about the right age, but had passed away. So we couldn't have her test. What was interesting was her son lived down the street from us when I lived in Tawnytown. And then we moved, and her widowed husband lived across the street from us at a new house. Again, sometimes you need to make your own match. And so is this the right person? And excitedly, we got a match. We got a match of 44 centimorgans, probably not birth mother or birth aunt. Okay. But here we have a place to hang our hook, and we're excited. What we did was we knew this person was possibly up to a 5th cousin. And so we worked our way back. And the good news was we only had to work our way back on the Greg line because, again, we were only working on the Greg, interested in the Greg. So worked it back 5 generations and then worked forward a whole bunch of generations. And guess what? We found a family that had a grandfather, would be my wife's grandfather, who had passed away, or his great grandfather, who had passed away from that same thing. Ultimately, we had another ancestor test, another person test. And again, we had actually spoken to this person before, and she wasn't interested, but then we gave them more information. They're like, oh, sure, I'll take the DNA test. Come to find out, they end up being first cousins once removed. I don't talk a lot about this section because, unfortunately, the birth mother and her did not go on a whole lot. It wasn't the happy reunion that you hope for, but you never know. And so she did know to find out who her birth mother was and found out more about that family. And more importantly, they found out some medical information that helped my stepdaughter find out medical information that helped her in the end. We also needed to know more about her birth father. We didn't know, again, went back to that same sort of thing. Who is her birth father? We didn't know a whole lot about the birth father at all. We just knew about he had to be in the Maryland area about 9 months before Sue was born. That's all we knew. I went and was working on GWorks. It originally was a DOS-based application. I created a website, and Sue decides, okay, it's time. So a lot of times, a lot of you will work with adoptees at points and you wonder, I've given them all the information. Why aren't they doing anything with it? It takes a lot for adoptees to process this information. I've worked with a lot of adoptees over the years, and I've been guilty of this just as much. You push information from your vantage point. You're just pushing them information. Sometimes it's too fast. You're sending them down the information down like a fire hose. And sometimes you need to wait for them to ask the questions and let them process it, because this is exciting to you, but this is their life to them. So she finally decided one day that it's time. She wants to find her birth father. So I've continued working on GWorks. And in October 2014, I go to Ireland and I present information. I basically say, is this the right ancestors? Am I in the right area? I find some Groves. I find Pattersons, which seem to be interesting. I find Dunn. So one of the things I say is, am I Dunn? D-U-N-N. And I'm excited. I decided to put this out last minute in my presentation to say, hey, I think I'm in the right area. Boy, would I be embarrassed if I wasn't. Luckily, I continued working down and we found, okay, this is an interesting tree from somebody else. We decide we're going to do some target testing. So again, what do we know about the father's side? Again, we knew that born in Maryland, and all we knew. We did know, and going back to CMA and to ASDA before, we knew Matt Kelly, that person we saw early on. We knew that because he didn't match the birth mother side, this is a birth mother match. If you look here in the yellow, that green is the birth mother's side. We see that he doesn't match anybody in that group. So these people we know would be on the birth mother. The second and third person we know is on the birth mother because they also match, or they match each other. They're actually not on the birth mother side because they don't match the birth mother. So the pink and blue there don't match the birth mother side, even though they're over the same sex. I mean, so it's got to be on the father's side. Similarly, we see Matt Kelly, the person we're most interested in, a friend of Sue's, became her cousin, matches on segment 7, but doesn't match to, again, the birth mother on that side. So we know he must be on the father's side. So this gives us, again, some information. If you look at the last number, that sort of brownish at the bottom, you will see that he or she does match the birth mother because of the ICW matches on top of there. So we know that that is on the mother's side. So we know that person's on the mother's side. Again, chromosomes are so powerful. I so much want to encourage people to start thinking more about using those things, because we tend to just want to look at the family trees and ancestors and how they match up. But the chromosomes give you so much information to work from. I did have ancestry DNA that helps a little bit. I have a 4th to 6th cousin. I have 2 4th to 6th cousins. That's the closest I have on ancestry on this side. 23andMe has some interesting third cousins, and I put them in quotes. Family tree DNA has some 5th, 6th, 7th cousins. They're like way off. So what do? I start building some trees. Working with the DNAGedcom tool, I was able to find some common ancestors between the groups. And so I worked with those and tried to bring them down. It helps you understand the data. I was building all these trees. Back then, I was building all these trees by hand. So I'd find a match and I'd have to build a GEDCOM. So it was nice being able to work with GEDCOMs myself, because you start learning and you start remembering some of the things. So a lot of people like working with their GEDCOMs directly and working with those. You can do that. I think it's so nice to be able to work with a lot of these other trees and stuff like that and have them just come in automatically. As I started doing this, I started finding some patterns. So one of the first patterns I found a Henry Grove and an Anna Engel. Hopefully you can see those over there. And I built a tree down through and started finding some Pattersons. Again, I knew some names and I knew some patterns and stuff. And I'm like, this is interesting. This is an area I want to look into some more. Again, what we're trying to do is see how these two trees, how different trees match up together. The other thing I knew was this person had to be in Maryland at least 9 months before. So I assumed, again, that they probably stayed in Maryland at some point. It was just an assumption. But what I started doing was, as I was building trees down, I noticed a lot of those trees went west, whichever way west is for you guys. And so if they went out to Kansas and stuff like that, I'm like, okay, it's probably not the right family. And then I started finding, okay, no one seemed to be staying in the Maryland area. I even had somebody go to Ohio, and I'm like, they're going west. Okay, give up. So I kept looking and working. I used surname searches and I did comparisons, and you have to build up the spouses. So really your spouses are the most important person, because you have that tree. You need to build those trees off to the sides and see if they go out and build up to another match. So you build that out and then go down. Did I find a match? Did I build that out? Did I go down? Do I find a match? So I was getting frustrated, getting stressed. What's going on? And I remembered that third cousin. I just had to take a step back. That third cousin, it's like, maybe they're not a third cousin. Maybe they're a fourth cousin. Maybe they're a little further. So I worked back a couple more branches back, came down as a work back, as like I found family that moved to Ohio again. And I was like, okay, well, let me look a little more. They came back to Maryland. I'm like, yay. I'm like, hold a minute. They came to Maryland and they are in the county next to where the birth mother is. I'm like ecstatic. This is like, is this it? Is this possible? We had some other hints. We knew a little bit about the birth father's family. They were supposed to be professionals, and the mother was a socialite. So we knew the mother didn't work, but the father was some sort of professional. Everything seemed to fit with a lot of the other non-IDs again. So again, it's important to learn whatever you can about that person, whatever you can about the person that you're researching. So how do we know for sure, though? What I did know was we had a 23andMe match on one side, and that was it. It just happened to be that 123andMe match. When I found that person, I built them down and found this ancestor. And when I looked at their parents and built them back, they tied into my ancestry fourth cousins. And just as importantly, they tied into, on the other side, the mother's side, the grandmother's side, some family tree DNAs, miscellaneous distant matches. I couldn't have done this without 23andMe, Ancestry, and Family Tree DNA. And back in 2015, February 2015, I was able to present Northern Virginia the fact that we actually found my wife's birth father. So here's a picture of my wife with her birth father. On the right here is a passport photo that he had never seen of his mom and his grandmother. So this is his mom right here as a baby. They actually were an attaché, business attaché in Europe, and they would actually go to Europe a lot. The family was actually a judge. So again, met with the professionals. And here's a picture of him as a younger child. And now we can proudly say that Sue has lots of close matches. She has her daughter, of course. She has two half sisters on one side, another half sister on the other, and then several cousins and uncles and stuff like that in there. And so she knows all about her family and where she came from now. But what I find interesting is here's a picture of her done great grandmother. And if you look, you will see the eyes and the nose match so much with her eyes and nose and mouth. And then even the jawline matches so well. And I remember hearing my wife say that her half sister was in her uncle's house and saw a picture and it's like, oh my God, that's Sue. And sure enough, it was. And here's Sue with her daughter and with her mom. Again, her adopted mom, but whenever I say her mom, it is her mom. And to bring it all around, this is her in Ireland. You probably can't see her real well, but she's in the mirror back in the back, taking the picture. And you can see a picture of Matt Kelly, and you can see a picture of her half sister sitting there. She introduced her half sister to a cousin that she's known from Ireland, was the first person that she knew that had her same DNA. And again, another picture of her and her two half sisters, and they just look together.